Now I want you to imagine for a while that you're a cow farmer, and outside the cows are saying moo, moo. I know that's a bit hard given that you probably have your handphone in front of you and you're probably just more interested in K-drama or League of Legends or something, but let's put it aside. Imagine you're a cow farmer and you'll be quite interested in trying to increase the milk production of your cows. Now how would you do that? Now common sense or basic intelligence would tell you just choose the cows which produce the most milk and breed them, right? Then I can get baby cows which will grow up to produce even more milk. Now it turns out that this sort of common sense solution actually has a scientific term, and that term is artificial selection, which is what we're going to look at in this video. So in this video, we're going to take a look at what is artificial selection, and also importantly, you need to be aware of some of the examples of artificial selection in both plants and animals. So what is artificial selection? Well, it's a definition, and definitions are important, so bear this in mind. Artificial selection is this process where humans try to increase the frequency of a desired trait, right, for example, milk production, in a population of plants and animals through selective breeding. So the main process, the main thing that happens in artificial selection is selective breeding. Basically, I select the individuals with certain traits that I like, and I breed them together. So artificial selection has some similarities and differences with natural selection. Now, of course, the main difference is that in natural selection, it is the environment, it is nature that selects for the better adapted varieties, right? But in artificial selection, it is humans who select. And we don't necessarily select for better adapted varieties. No, we select for the varieties that suit our needs. So I select, for example, for the cows that produce the most milk, or the fruits which are the sweetest. Now in both natural and artificial selection, there will always be variation, right? So that's why there are different types of varieties and then I select. And in both artificial and natural selection, there will ultimately be a change in the frequency of traits and alleles in the population. So in natural selection, the better adapted traits will be increased in frequency. And for artificial selection, those traits that the humans desire will increase in the population over time. So let's begin with selective breeding and artificial selection in plants. Now imagine for a while that you're a farmer and you're growing plants and you want to increase the quality of your plants so you can earn more money, right? So how will you do that? Well, here's how you do it. As a breeder, you would select the plants with more desirable traits. So you could, for example, if you want more sweeter fruits, then you pick the plants with the sweetest fruits. If you want plants with more oil, then you pick the plants with more oil. So I want you to imagine, let's use the example of oil content. So imagine that you have quite a number of crops, so you've grown quite a number of plants, and there's variation, right? So some of these plants will produce more oil, while others will produce less oil. So I'll pick the plant which produces the most oil. I'll take seeds from this plant and I will grow them into the next batch of crops. Second step, okay, so this seed here will grow into a new batch of crops. Let's get our new batch of crops. Right, and this new batch of crops would produce more oil than the previous batch of crops. Now what do I do now? I will then self-fertilize this new plant. So I hope you remember what self-fertilization is. I'll take pollen from the flower of this plant and I'll put it on the stigma of another flower from the same plant. So I self-fertilize the plants and then I take the seeds from that self-fertilization and I grow it into the next generation. And I repeat this process of growing seeds, self-fertilization, growing seeds, self-fertilization, and eventually I hope to get pure breeding plants with my desired trait. And in this case, my desired trait is high oil content. So eventually I hope that I'll get a plant which is pure breeding so that when I self-fertilize, I only get seeds which grow into high oil plants. So what I'm doing is I just so again let's see what we do. We actually select the plants with the most desirable traits and then we self-fertilize them and we grow the seeds, and we do this over many generations. So you need to know, importantly, some examples of selective breeding in plants. And one famous example is our modern corn. Modern corn was produced through the selective breeding of a plant called the Theosinte. So here's Theosinte, and originally Theosinte looks kind of like this, nothing like our modern day corn. But what happened was that people selected increasingly for those varieties with a greater number of seeds, fleshier seeds, and over time you get the modern corn. Right, so they would pick every generation the one with more seeds, fleshy seeds. They'll self-fertilize, and then eventually they get the modern corn. Now, another famous success story of selective breeding in plants involves this plant called the wild mustard plant. So the common wild mustard, the scientific name is the brassica. Through selective breeding has given rise to many of our common vegetables today. So artificial selection of the wild mustard plant has given rise to many of our common vegetables, for example, cabbage, cauliflower, broccoli. So for example, here's our wild mustard, and if I select for wild mustard plants with more and more leaves, I get a vegetable called the kale. If I select for wild mustard plants with big flower clusters, then eventually I will get cauliflower. If I select for mustard plants with what we call the stems and flowers, then eventually I got the broccoli. Right? And that's how you get different common vegetables from that same original plant through artificial selection. Right, so here's another picture showing that same example of broccoli, cabbage produced through artificial selection. Another economically important plant that has resulted from artificial selections of banana. So here's our wild banana. It looks nothing like our crops that we grow now for food. The original wild banana is short, it's not long, it's got many large seeds, it's not very fleshy, and so people just did selective breeding. They chose those individual plants with more fleshy fruit, smaller seeds, longer fruit, and over time became our modern day banana. That's amazing, isn't it? So the next time you bite into the banana, think about how much effort it took, how many years it took for that selective breeding to take place, artificial selection to produce the banana you're eating. Alright, moving on, now we take a look at selective breeding in animals. So in the case of animals, it's slightly different from plants. For example, the example of the cows, right, wanting to produce more milk. What I would do as a breeder is I would select male and female animals with desirable traits for selective breeding. So I might select the female cows with a lot of milk, and then the male cows with a lot of meat, and I will breed them together. Now take note, the important difference is that animals cannot be self-fertilized. There's no way a female cow is going to fertilize itself. And then I just repeat this process. So in the next generation, I pick the best females and the best males, and I breed them together. And over time, you'll get an increase in the frequency of your desired trait. So more milk production in the females and better meat in the males over time. Now, selective breeding in animals, you need to know some famous examples. One of them is the scaleless chicken. So some chicken varieties have no feathers, and people just breed these no-feathered varieties together. And over many generations, you get the scaleless chicken, which is really bad for the animals actually. So natural selection would never produce such a thing, because nature would never select for such chickens. But we would, right? Because we want chickens that are easy to eat. Another example is the bubble-eyed goldfish. So people chose and selected goldfish with bigger cheeks over many generations to get this. Again, natural selection would never produce something like this, right? Because it's just really not very good for survival to have big cheeks. But it's something that we have done. So another famous example of selective breeding would be the domestication of animals. So the idea is that, animals in the past would not be domesticated. They will not be kept at home. So domestication just means like kept at home or reared. Like you rear them on a farm, or you keep them as pets, or you rear them, right? So in the past, you would never have that, right? All you had was wild cows and wild chickens like these, which look very different from the chickens that we breed in our farms now. So how did that happen? Well, people think that, originally there are all these wild chickens, and people would selectively breed, so selective breeding, breed those chickens with maybe smaller and smaller wings or shorter and shorter legs to get the domestic chickens that we have today. Similarly, people think that the modern day pet dogs that we keep, how many of you have dogs? Right, the modern day dogs that we have came from people selectively breeding wolves that were more and more tame. So they'll select the more tame wolves, and over the generations it would become more and more domesticated and it become more and more like the dogs that we know today. And of course, another application of selective breeding in animals would be all these economically important animals, for example, animals which produce more meat or more milk. Okay, in the last part of this video, I'm going to introduce you to this process called hybridization. Have you heard of the word hybrid? You might know that it refers to the combination of two things, right? A hybrid. And so hybridization is the process where two different varieties are crossed together to produce a new variety which has a combination of the parental traits. Okay, so I'm thinking, let's say I've got variety A and B, I cross them together and I get a new variety C which has traits from A and also traits from B combined, so like the best of both worlds. One example of hybridization is in sugarcane. I love sugarcane juice in hawker centers, right? So some people who grow sugarcane find that there's a disease-resistant variety of it, but it's not very sweet. And then there's a high sugar variety of it, but it's not very good at fighting diseases. So what we can do is we can cross both of them and then create a hybrid which has both disease resistance and high sugar. Another example of hybridization is in plants is when we cross certain varieties of fruits together. Many of our apples are actually varieties which are formed through crossing of other apple varieties. And one famous example of plant hybridization is when you take a orange and you cross it with a pomelo, and guess what you get? You actually get grapefruit. And grapefruit is actually a result of hybridization. Now, how about in animals? Well, in animals, we can also have hybridization. So one famous example is with cows. So here's the Jersey cow. It produces a lot of good milk, but it cannot live in warm climates. And here's the Brahman bull over here. It looks more saggy. He can live in warm climate, but he doesn't produce that good milk. So what we can do is we can cross a Jersey cow with a Brahman bull to produce a hybrid that produces both good milk and can also grow in warm climates. Another famous example of hybridization in animals would be mules. Well, mules are actually a cross between horses and donkeys. Now, of course, all is not great and rosy with hybridization. When you do hybridization, it also comes with its own set of problems. Firstly, plant hybrids are mostly not pure breeding. So for example, you saw that sugarcane just now, it make a hybrid of a disease-resistant high-sugar sugarcane. If you bred that with itself, you might not get back that same hybrid. So they're not pure breeding, and hence if you want to maintain that hybrid, you got to do it through vegetative propagation, which is asexual, right? So you just need to make a clone of it through asexual reproduction. Okay, next, if you want a pure breeding animal hybrid, it takes a very long time to obtain. And also, if you want to maintain a hybrid, for example, that Jersey cow, that cow that produces good milk in a warm climate, you will need to do it by inbreeding. Means that you have to breed it with itself. So inbreeding just means breed with itself. So hybrid, breed with hybrid. Now the problem with breeding a hybrid with itself is that even though you get all the beneficial traits in the hybrid, you can also end up accumulating a lot of recessive and harmful traits in the hybrid, right? Because you're just, breeding it with itself, you're just recycling and rearranging all those recessive alleles, and over time you might get offspring with all the recessive alleles as well. And finally, some animal hybrids may be sterile. Sterile means that they do not produce viable gametes. So they can produce gametes like sperm and egg, but they are not viable, which means that they cannot give rise to normal or healthy offspring. So here's a question to test yourself. You just have a read through and pause the video and play a game when you've tried it. Alright, so the example of artificial selection is here, and the rest are actually examples of natural selection. Okay, so in summary, make sure that by the end of this video, you're able to describe an example of artificial selection in plants and in animals. So how it's done, And what is the example? A named example.